You know, I filmed all these back to back. This has taken 4 hours out of my Saturday. But that's okay. Today is part 3 of the kitchen, and it is the final part of the kitchen. So today we talk about how the kitchen was customized, what was involved in the statement pieces that made the kitchen ultimately come together. If you're just joining us, today is part 3, to be clear. So part 1, we talked about the design and the demolition of the kitchen. Part 2 was all about creating a room that had plumbing and electricity again and could function as a kitchen. I implore you to watch those first if you are just joining. Otherwise, welcome. Let's get started. We're gonna start with the tool cabinet. You've seen it a couple times. It was one of the left behind original kitchen cabinets. The former owners had it in the laundry room initially, and I moved it out of there. It was painted with a sky blue kind of chalky paint. That wasn't gonna work for me. You can see it in the photo here. Originally, it wasn't that size either. That bottom piece had been a different cabinet somewhere else, and they attached those top 2 cabinets to it. Inside, it's where I keep all my tools, my household tools, like the paintbrushes, my tape, caulking, all that's nitty-gritty stuff that I use more than anything else. I just wanted it readily on hand so that I could access it whenever I need it, which is almost on the daily. I'm going into that cabinet. At this point, it is attached to the wall. I used leftover kick plates from the cabinets. That's that dark blue piece there. In the lower middle, that piece was to hide the seam from where the cabinets had been joined. But then at the bottom and the upper one, that was just to add a little bit more trim detail. The piece that's back against the wall was to get it more flush to the wall, because in its age, it was pretty beat up along its back and did not want to be seamless to the wall. And then I also added the crown molding around the top of it so that it would match a little bit more other pieces. Specifically, it would match the tops of the door frames. And then I painted it iron ore. Iron ore is the most consistent paint color in the house. It starts down here in the kitchen, but it really, once you hit the living room, it is on the stairs, it's the entire stairwell, it is all of the trim upstairs. It's the most used color in the house. I've also at that point caulked along the wall to fill any remaining gaps. And then I painted the doors. They shined up really nicely, and I took all of the original hardware off the cabinet and just spray painted it with a brass spray paint, because most of the hardware that was on it had paint all over it. It wasn't in great shape. I think it must have had some sort of like a clear coat enamel from back in the day, and a lot of it had yellowed and was flaking off. They still function beautifully. And then this was the piece once the rest of the trim was done in the kitchen from the initial phase. And then that's also the corner where my goats pictures originally existed. Like, I have my little ghosts. I've got these guys, and I was at a thrift store today, or an antique store, and they had this print on canvas. This print, when I ordered it, was like 15 bucks. The canvas was 20 and came with a frame, and they had one I had not seen before. This little guy. And I just think it's so cute. But like, look at the size comparison, Megan. It's huge compared to those, and it was $20 with a frame. I'm in love. He's so cute. Next, we're gonna move on to the island, and the island is truly one of my favorite pieces in the entire house. And it's something that, should the day ever come, or whenever the day comes that I would move, I would be hard pressed to not dismantle it and take it with me, because I love it. To be clear, by take it with me, I mean remove the top of it and then just put a new generic wood butcher block top on top for whoever was purchasing the house. I'm not planning on selling my house. It's just something that's like in my mind. So the island, this is my amazing design for it. The kitchen is gigantic. I wanted an island that was going to be just shy of 7 feet long. The island was inspired by these 2 photos. These were from when I was planning the house. This was part of my Pinterest exploration. I wasn't gonna have natural wood much in the kitchen. Everything's painted, but I wanted a touch of something that was natural and earthy feeling and old, because when everything is looking new, it starts looking very modern. I like the blend of modern and old, but I didn't want it to look entirely like, oh, there's your brand new kitchen. There needed to be some age in it. With these pictures, I loved the thick, chunky legs, and I loved the thick top. So I sent my dad that picture, and we got to work. He has quite the supply of old wood, a lot of old barn wood. In this photo here, this was after I had selected the pieces that I wanted. The four in the middle, I want to say they had been cut 50, 60 years ago. And if I'm wrong, Dad, and you're watching this, I'm sorry. I want to say they'd been cut at least 50 or 60 years ago, probably longer than that. But I liked them because they have blade marks in them from going through the sawmill. The outside pieces are real old barn wood. And one of them in particular was in really rough shape, but I wanted that because I didn't want anything looking brand spanking new. I wanted the age and the marks. As my dad's working on it, it was tricky because a lot of these were in different thicknesses for the, just picking up numbers here. If the counter was 1 inch on one piece, it might be 1 1/4 on another. So they were all different, and I didn't want too much going on in terms of smoothing them down. You know, my dad had to cut the sides cleanly so they could be joined together, but I didn't want much in terms of modifying them. Everything has been glued together. Those clamps are holding it together so that the glue can dry. But you can see the piece on the left that is pretty wonky looking, warbled. It had these real deep cracks in it as well. And my dad, I had him fill that with an epoxy. While I love the look, you also don't want like 1/2 inch deep crevices in your countertop because that's not gonna be great when it comes to crumbs and things getting in it. Then Dad started designing the legs. So the legs for it are just, I'm gonna say they're 6x6 posts. And the legs, the supports for this thing are all actually new pieces. He did purchase new wood, but I aged it. I'm going to show you how I aged it in a couple videos here. So I am using an angle grinder, and what I'm doing is for the end pieces specifically, because they were pretty sharp cornered, I wanted to just rip the hell out of them and smoothing them down, rounding them out, just having, I kept in my mind referring to it as the palm test, where like if you were to lean your hand against the corner of the table, how does your hand fit on the corner? Nice and rounded and smooth. First I started with the end pieces, and then I started flipping the thing over so it was top down and ripping the hell out of stuff. I said before they were at different depths, and it was more important to have some of the bottom pieces lined up just for the structure rather than the top. In the last video, I'm going over the top of it and gouging out where there was a lip from the boards meeting because I could control that. I didn't want to lose the sawmill marks. This was going to get us to where we needed to be. This was part of the cleanup after I'd gone to town on it. So you can see where the wood is lighter, and that's from where I had just gouged it out. This was the finalized version of the legs. Everything you can see is very sharp cornered, and that was all going to be changing. The legs had cracked a bit, and that just happens with wood. So Dad filled that with epoxy, which is why this looks like it's got stuff smeared on it. But once I had gone through and sanded it, no problem at all. You can kind of tell in this picture that I've already rounded out the edges of the legs. In person, you can see that I really chunked them out just to make them look like they've been through the ringer a bit and that they're not brand new. And then one of the cross braces, this is another example of how I rounded things out. Then it was time to start finishing it. If you saw last week's episode, I talked about the initial trim on the hood over my cooktop. So everything was going to get that same stain process. Here are the legs laid out on the picnic table that had been my island for a couple months while living at the house. I used a Cabernet stain first, which is obviously hideous. And purpley looking, but it's because I wanted a warm undertone to everything. And then I went over it with Kona, which is like a rich dark brown stain. So this is with the Kona, and then you can kind of get a sense in this image of what the legs were looking like on their sides. But that was with polyurethane on them, and then it was time to start assembling. The plan with the legs was that those cross braces that go through at the bottom, you can see some dowels in this. That was so that there would be little wedges attached to them to prevent those cross braces from sliding out. I don't love how they look now. At the time, it was just a quick, this is going to resolve the issue that I have. I'll probably do something with them at some point just to zhuzh that up. The legs were installed this way. They were not attached to the floor by any means at this point. Then the top could go on. Once the top was on and I was happy with everything, there are, I think, 8-inch giant screws that go up through the floor in the basement into the bottom of the legs just to keep this thing from going anywhere. Here is the top ready for staining. You can see on the left-hand side there some dark marks, and what those were bolts that had been embedded in that wood that I wanted to keep there. The plan had been those were going to be, you know, the epoxy would be crystal clear, you'd be able to see the bolts, and it'd be just kind of this feature. Ultimately, the epoxy ended up getting real cloudy with whatever rust was remaining on them, I think. And then after staining and all that stuff, it just, you can barely tell that they're there at all. And that's okay. I know they're there, and that's whatever. It didn't turn out how I hoped it would turn out. And then this is that piece that was also real beat up that I was telling you about that we filled with epoxy to get those gouges. It's just so smooth, and I had gone over the whole thing with pretty fine grit sandpaper so that while the marks are still there from the saw blades, it's not rough by any means. You could run your hand over it before it had been stained or anything. This is with the Cabernet stain, so just, can you imagine if it had left it that way? Maybe that's a look for someone. It's not a look for me. But yeah, the Cabernet stain did its job of pulling the warmth through, because then with the Kona on top, it was more than just kind of a one-note color. And in person, it's hard to tell that there's any warmth there, but I'd be curious what this would look like if it was just the Kona, because I imagine the warmth is doing something that I just don't see anymore. But look at all the grain marks. They're just, it's so cool. Those blade marks, I love them. And then how much it changed once the polyurethane was on. So that really pulled the richness out, darkened the whole thing up, and it was just beautiful. The island is bar height, not counter height. I wanted something that was going to be different from the counters. And for me, I'm 6'4". This thing is amazing, especially when it comes to like folding laundry. It's right at my height. Wrapping presents. And ultimately, this is the project table in the house. I do all of the projects right here. I'll cover it with a drop cloth. I have screwed up the finish on this using some chemicals on things that I shouldn't have, or I should have used plastic underneath. It does need to get touched up because it's been a rough run of time for this baby.
I would just like to show you in all of its glory with Paolo here.
The island that now has all of its polyurethane on it. This is like Pottery Barn quality shit that I did here. You can kind of see the original bolts in their epoxy in there. This is my favorite side, like how worn it all is. And that's original, like that's 150-year-old wood. The legs aren't totally done yet, so that I've got all these little like nubbins that will go on right there to look like pegs. So I would be adding 4 bar height stools to the island. 3 of them are along the one side, and then there's one on the opposite because there is a large wood box here for the trash, which I'll show you guys in a moment. But first, by the end of 2023, I hated the kitchen color. I was starting to realize that in a house that is dark academia themed, which by nature is dark colors, why would you use white? This space and that are the only ones in the house with white. So I was like, I gotta change. I gotta tone it back because it just felt like it was never painted. It felt like it was primer on the sheetrock. Right after Thanksgiving, got the bug up my butt to paint, and I chose the color that's right in the middle of this swatch, which is Felted Wool by Sherwin-Williams. It was in the green family, but it's a little bit more of a greenish gray. I love this color. It's a great color, and this was all happening to get ready for Christmas. And I was hosting Christmas. I was having a Christmas party. There were a million and one things going on for a solid 4 weeks, and this is what kicked it off. And this, I think this picture was probably taken at 2 in the morning because I was just going and getting it done. This was starting to cut the trim in for the kitchen. This was the next morning after the cutting in had dried, and then first coat. And I always think it's funny how the first coat looks on top of things you've already painted because it always looks splotchy and icky. Once it dried, it was good. There's always got to be a but when I talk about these things. And while I loved the color, the way that it played off of the cabinet color, in theory, was going to be fine. In reality, I didn't like it because it made the cabinets look even more teal than they already were. So it was just something where the seed was planted in my mind of you're going to be changing the color of your cabinets. Mostly because I already knew that I was going to repaint them anyway. So by spring of 2024, there were a couple projects that started. One of them was the box underneath the island here. Now I had my trash cans just hanging out under the island. I don't know about you, I don't usually like having my trash and recyclables exposed in the kitchen. Not just from a I don't want to look at it standpoint, but also I don't want guests or company to see it just because it's trash, let's hide it. And another one of my amazing drawings, I sent this to my dad. This was with all the measurements that it would fit under the island perfectly and still have room for the stools. This kicked off router bits and choosing what you want your edges to look like on some of these things, because I wanted to start getting more into wood. And my dad, he's a wonderful woodworker. He would always ask me, are you gonna be painting this or staining it? And that was always the okay, this is the test of a question. But for the most part, things were going to be getting stained going forward rather than painted. So I don't have any pictures of it being built, but this was once it was in place. So you can see the scale of this thing. It is very large. I wanted a big pull-out drawer for underneath for the trash and recycling, and then a big pull-out drawer up top where I was going to be putting all of my boxes for plastic bags, saran wrap, aluminum foil, those things, because they weren't fitting very nicely in the drawers behind me. They were just a little too big. Some things were in drawers, some were in cabinets, and I wanted it all together. Dad delivered a box. Everything was just flat panels, and then I was going to dress it up. I went and purchased trim and attached this trim to the front of the cabinet. And then I also attached it to the sides of it because I wanted to zhuzh it up. I had cheap latex gloves. I don't know, is it a thing where stain eats through the gloves? Maybe I could probably Google it and know. I have a history of gloves ripping as I'm staining things. Also, my hands are humongous, so they tend to rip through things. This is with the Charming Stain Finger. I used this kind of smoky stain on them because I wanted the piece to not look like the island. Because to me, if it looked like the island, then the island wasn't going to feel like it was a standalone piece that had been found. It was going to look like something that was made. With this being a different color, it feels like, oh, you found this island, or you found this piece of furniture, and you found this one too. Or maybe not found, but I don't know what the word would be. Sourced. I don't know. Yeah, as that was coming together, I loved it. It was in place, and there's all my, stuff neatly in there. And then I ordered these giant handles, and they took 2 months for the handles to arrive. But again, I wanted them different from the hardware that's on the rest of the cabinetry because I wanted it to feel like it was its own thing. After the trash bin, it was time for my spice rack. I've only ever had my spices in the containers that they came in. My best friend Katie had purchased these spice containers off Amazon, and I saw them when I was visiting her down where they live and loved them. So but she had white labels, I think. Katie, let me know if I'm wrong. So I bought these and thought, well, I'm not going to have enough spices to fill all of these up. It'll be enough to just kind of fill my drawer. Until I started filling them and realized I had to order a second kit of it. With 2 kits, I was like, I don't have anywhere to put these. So I need to come up with a solution of how I can display my spices without shoving them all in a drawer, because I'm also someone where if I can see it, then I am more likely to use it. This was kind of gestating in the back of my mind that I was going to need to develop a plan that I could rope my dad in on to help me with. I knew I wanted it to look a bit like a hutch. I had this inspiration photo, but I wanted tip rails. You'd see them in things on shelves. I'm not finding the words. I found these on Etsy. They had to be custom ordered, so I did. They were very expensive for what they are. To me, they are what make it what it is. If they weren't there, it would just feel like, oh, here's this piece of furniture. They make it special. So I got those. Once they came in, I was able to start playing with the spice bottles and those tip rails and determining, okay, what do the shelves need to be? How wide does this piece need to be? I was measuring out, okay, how many shelves would you need in total in order to fit all of your bottles? From that, I came up with my plan. This was another example of just kind of throwing something at my dad and being like, this is what I'm thinking, do whatever. And I gave him one of the rails and said, this has to fit in the opening. And he pulled together this beautiful thing that so many people comment on when they come over. It's just wonderful. I wanted, instead of that inspiration photo had a drawer and cabinets on the bottom, I just wanted cabinets because I have enough drawers. But he built it in 2 pieces. It has real beadboard across the back. He had asked, are you going to be painting this? And I said, everything but the beadboard and the shelf that it sits on will be painted. Those are gonna be staying. He brought this over. He did some detail work around the top. He added the crown molding for me because he had some spare crown molding at his house, so got that on there. And then I went to town staining it. Now, stain is never going to be my favorite thing. I just don't love the whole process, but I do love how it looks when it's done, especially when it's done well. I just have yet to really perfect doing it. There's a very high margin of error. It stresses me out. I'll be honest, it really stresses me out. I screwed up a lot at my first house when I redid the floors, the overlaps, and it's just like, when I know I have to stain something, I'm just like, oh God, okay, well, let the Dark Lord be on my side. The stain turned out perfectly on this. Once that was polyurethaned, I decided to paint it. So it is painted Muddled Basil by Sherwin-Williams. I wanted a nice rich green that worked well with the felted wool wall color. Once it was together, like, just gorgeous. I love it. This is a piece that is going to get redone like everything else. All right, for the bigger one, the hood over the cooktop. Initially, it was just the joint compound that I left some intentional texture on. I wanted to refinish the hood so that it was going to look like a lime wash. One of the people that I follow on YouTube, Exo McKenna, she had done this really great finish in one of her houses, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna do that, and I screen grabbed pictures of it, and it was gonna look great. I did not purchase lime wash to do it with. I was going to do it with techniques, with kind of faux finish with paint. So I bought 3 different shades of a tan beigey color and went to town doing it. This is how it started turning out. That was like the first pass, the second, the third. That was in daylight the next day. And that was me realizing that it looked like I had created something that you would find in the Olive Garden. I hated it. It was one of those things where as soon as it was dry, I was like, you've made a critical error, but I didn't know how to fix it because it's textured. I can't just paint it to match the cabinets because it's not gonna match them. It's textured. I'll say textured again. Instead of worrying about it, I took the upstairs bedroom paint that I had because I had a ton of leftover paint and I just slapped it on there, dark blue, done. That kind of pulled the blue a bit more out of the cabinets flanking it. But once the walls had been repainted, that blue stuck out like a sore thumb. Here's the other problem. That hood that I purchased to go over the cooktop, the super expensive one that I shouldn't have purchased. From day one, when my dad and I installed it, hooked it up, ran it, yep, it works. Sucks air up, it's good. We installed the ductwork for it, closed the whole thing in, and that was that. It would be several months before I would cook anything on that cooktop because it was the middle of summer. It was hot in the house all the time. When fall came, I realized the hood was not working. You could turn it on. The thing was louder than a jet engine. You could hold, I don't know, they call it doing the feather test, but holding up something super light, there was no movement. It did not move the air at all. Over the year, I started thinking, okay, we must have done something wrong, or maybe there's something blocking it. Well, it's not blocking outside in the vent. What the hell? Eventually, I Googled it and it said that this particular hood sometimes has an issue where it's delivered to people with its, I don't know what you would call it, an inverter flap, upside down. Okay, maybe it's that. The only way to get to it, because of how we had to install the damn thing, was to cut out the sheetrock on the front of the hood to access it, to get inside and see what was going on. I cut out all the sheetrock to get inside of the hood. Though the instructions were very vague and not good at all, one thing they said was that you should not use accordion vent, you should only use rigid vent. They did not explain why, and we were like, well, we can't use rigid because of how things were configured, it's not gonna work. And where I needed the vent outside to be, it had to be a certain way, so only accordion would do it. It's gonna be fine. Here's the problem. You can see I am unscrewing that bit, and that is because that flap was installed correctly, but with an accordion, once it's down on it, while the diameter might be good to go over the mount, the interior diameter was smaller because of it being condensed, so the flap couldn't move. All right, so the fan is
working again, which is great. To fix that, I cut the flaps like a 1/2 inch all the way around and then folded them over. So now they can fully move in there. I'm gonna put this piece of wood behind here so I can reattach the sheetrock. And then I have some birch paneling that is going to be covering the whole thing. And then I'll be doing trim on top of that. The reason I'm doing that, and I took off also this trim that was here yesterday, that trim stuck out 1 3/4 inches. And when this is all said and done, it will stick out 1/2 inch. It'll stop this cabinet door from hitting the trim that was here, and it will enable me to start doing some more exciting detail work that I intended but just didn't execute properly the first time around.
The final straw had been after I had cut this open, I hit my head so hard on the corner of that thing that I went to the tool cabinet and grabbed a hammer and ripped the stuff off because I was mad. I had big feelings. I came across, very randomly, this photo on Instagram. As you can see, I just screen grabbed it straight from the reel that it popped up on. And I was like, oh, I like that. And I can do that. I closed up the hole that was there and I went and bought birch panels from Menards. Installed them on the sides first because the top was going to need some clever cutting, which I'm not adept at, but I could do it. I got that whole thing installed and secured. And then it was going to be a game of masking seams and corners with trim. I've mentioned before that just because I cut corners doesn't mean I don't know how to do something. And I have a client who I have been working on her basement and remodeling the basement, and it required a lot of trim work. Because it's someone else, it's not me, I'm taking my time and doing everything correctly. And I'm so blown away by how good things look when you take your time and do it correctly, which is also what phase 2 of this house is going to be. It is going back through and fixing things that you hustled your way through originally. I started buying these kind of rounded crown pieces. I didn't want huge crown molding on the hood, but this was gonna hide the seams. And then I bought these corner pieces. So it's like a 90-degree angle. Those were gonna be covering where the panels met on the corners. So with that on, I got real crafty on the corners of those because again, I was taking my time. And like, yeah, right here it looks rough because the nails are popping out still. And I would go through with my little, I don't know what you would call it, a nail pounder and pound those in. But I installed some decorative trim across the front of it, started filling my holes with putty, and then it was time to stain it. To do that, I taped off as best I could, knowing that like if stain got onto the paint, it was gonna get fixed down the line anyway. This first clear coat that I'm putting on is a wood conditioner, and that is for raw wood or old wood that hasn't been stained in a really long time. And what the conditioner does is it prevents your stain from drying out too quickly. And I've done that a couple times on other pieces and had success with it. But something that was a first for me was using a gel stain. I can't say I loved using a gel stain. The reason I did was because stain is messy and I didn't want it dripping anywhere accidentally. The speed at which I was working to get this done was just insane, busting my ass to make sure I didn't have streaks. It turned out beautiful and I was very happy with it, but I just thought like there's a lot of hype for gel stain and I didn't really see why. The next day, I had to give it 24 hours or 48 hours, something like that. It was time for polyurethane, so I used poly to seal this baby in. Then it was time to pull off the tape and do some touch-up paint on the cabinets since they were looking a little icky. Just a massive improvement over what was there. To determine what was gonna go on it to decorate it, I saw this picture, which this is how a lot of the screen grabs exist in my phone. I saw this thing of a rail on the wall and thought that would be really cool on your hood. So I bought this rail from IKEA that is, you know, just a kitchen rail, and I bought the hooks that go with it, but I spray painted the whole thing in the spray paint that I like because it came as a shiny brass and I didn't want that. As I've said, I like a dull brass. So I repainted that and covered it, and the most important thing is this video here.
Look at that working the way it's supposed to. Going right on up.
So not only did the hood finally work, you know, a year and a half after installing it, it was much quieter now that it wasn't trying to suck up a solid piece. The hood itself, beautiful, beautiful, turned out great. So I still have another piece to attach to the top. I needed a smaller rail for the higher portion, but we're almost there. When it came time to get rid of my dining table. So the dining table, I liked it. It was from Pottery Barn. I'd had it for a few years, but once the spice rack went in, the table could not exist the way that it had. It had run widthwise for the kitchen, but with the spice rack there, you couldn't get between the spice rack and the table. When I even first moved in, I knew eventually I would want a round table just because everything in the kitchen is very sharp cornered and squared, and I wanted something round to offset things. The time had come this fall to get rid of it. I do miss aspects of the table, like Paolo specifically liked hanging out there when I would have a meal by myself, just watching me. I sold the table on Facebook and bought this one off of Facebook. And this table was, I want to say, 50 bucks. The table was also, it appeared to be real wood. There's no like, oh, gotcha surprise here. It appeared to be real wood, and I thought, okay, great. I can sand it down and refinish this and just kind of have fun with it and turn it a little bit more into an art project rather than some stately piece, because, you know, sometimes you can't polish a turd. This table, it got sanded down. I was so impressed with how much it sanded down, and only toward the end did I realize it was not real wood all the way through. It was like a particle board in the middle, and there are only like 2 or 3 spots on the corners of the top where I sanded far enough down that the veneer eroded away. So you really can't tell that it's particle board. Sanded that whole thing down and then stained it, and I stained it this smoky gray color. I don't remember the name of that color. Stained it this gray color, stained the leaf that, got the polyurethane applied to it, and it was just...
In my opinion, it turned out pretty awesome. I haven't decided what I'm doing fully down here yet, but I wanted to get the top done, but it is dry. I think I'm gonna do a 4th coat of polyurethane on top of this thing, but like, that looks pretty awesome considering it was, you know, that amber kind of golden honey oak.
I was shocked at how good it turned out, because apart from buying the stain, I had everything else. So it was $50 and $8 for stain to redo this table. And I just was so floored with how good it turned out. For the base, this is where you can tell that it's from the 80s. You know, I don't know, was that an octagon shape? I don't know. No, it was 6 sides. What's 6? It's a different shape, it's not an octagon. I wanted to make it look a little bit more like a tree stump a bit that was kind of raw and then forming into a nicer base, and then the legs I was going to have fun with. I took my angle grinder the way I had attacked the island here and knocked off as much of the sharp corners at the top of this thing as I could, which resulted in it looking like this. So this was after it had been stained and I was applying polyurethane to the thing. And I just kept thinking the whole time, like, even if you don't love it, it was $50. At some point in time, you can get a nicer table, but I do like it. Something to note, I never sit at my dining table. I only sit at the island, so who cares, really? I stained the finished looking portion of the base the same gray that the top was. For what I could sand on the legs, I did those the same gray. Since they are clawed feet, I wanted them to look that way. So I did a black and gray kind of ombre finish on the feet, and then I did gold leaf on the ball. That gold leaf will come into play for the downstairs bathroom. I've had it for 2 years and had not used it, so I thought, oh, you might as well give it a whirl on this, and I did. So that's how the table turned out. We're just about at the end here, guys, so that means it's time for before and afters. that's about it, you guys. That's the kitchen. I've talked a lot about phase 2, I know, and phase 2 is really going to be a top to bottom refresh for the kitchen. Color scheme is going to change pretty drastically. We've got some doorways that are going to get raised upward. Things are going to get zhushed and polished, and I think when the remodel is done, which probably won't be until next winter. It's gonna be a minute because I have other projects in line this year. It's gonna be cool. I think the kitchen's just gonna really be special. So until then, next week we are going to be talking about the laundry room and then the half bathroom and pantry here. Those are going to be a double up episode, which is not going to be 3 parts like this was. Thanks so much for watching these. If you have any questions on anything you saw in the video today, questions about the island or the spice rack or anything, or there were pictures that you feel I didn't show of the kitchen that you want to see or you're curious about, please leave your questions in the comments below. You can also reach out to me through Instagram, which would probably be easier to get additional photos if there was something you wanted a closer examination on. Find me on Instagram though at restoring_Sean. And that's about it. I'll see you guys next week, Wednesday. Fresh content. We'll keep this rolling. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I will see you soon.